Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, EVP of Products and Services here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, I am pleased to host another edition of Cut the Shit After Hours, our semi-regular series where I sit down with the co-founders of Plow Networks, Bryan Law and Cameron Plato, and have a free-ranging conversation about a topic or two of interest. Today we're going to go back to a topic we touched on during our very first Cut the Shit After Hours session back in the fall, and that's the topic of buying personas and buying styles. I spent some time trying to get Bryan and Cameron to share their insights on what buying styles are, how to figure out what your buying persona is, and why it's a good exercise to go through, especially if you are responsible for purchasing stuff for your company or business. Along the way, they share some highlights and lowlights of their roughly 40 years combined in technology sales. And as usual, we have a few laughs at each other's expense. Enjoy. Welcome back, everybody. Cut the Shit After Hours. I've got Bryan Law and Cameron Plato with me again today. Before I let these guys jump in, I did want to give a quick shout out to the podcast. This is our 20th episode. Podcasting's been around a long time now, so there are people with literally thousands of episodes, so we probably shouldn't pat ourselves on the back too much just quite yet.
20 is one step closer to 1,000.
But 20 feels pretty good. Yeah, try not to hit the mic. She just told us.
Why don't you go ahead and knee the table and clear your throat and maybe spill something?
Can't take these guys anywhere. But we're really glad to be back. Last time the three of us were together, it was the 10-year anniversary. That was when we recorded and did a little bit of walk down memory lane. We heard some stories about the early office space and some things like that. So
I had COVID, I think, right?
You did. You were quarantined.
But we're all about milestones. That was 10. This is 20.
Yeah, that's when we show up.
Mm-hmm. That's right. You guys come in on the big time.
Only big anniversary.
Big time dates.
Big timers.
But we thought today we don't have anything specific like news or milestones other than this is our 20th episode to cover today. But we wanted to kind of go back and pick up a little bit. It's been a while. Back in the fall, I think maybe our first sort of Cut the Shit After Hours, we got into a little bit of this idea of what we were calling buyer personas. Yep. And it was around selling. And, I was making a comment, I think maybe started it around when I was a CIO, knowing how to buy. I felt like it was important as a CIO to know how to buy. That's a fair expectation for someone who hires you, but also I think even for your vendors or partners, for you to represent and to understand what it is you're trying to do, why, some of that. And we got into it a little bit, but we sort of short-circuited that conversation and moved on. So we thought it might make sense to kind of come back, and particularly for the two of you, since you've been in the business much longer than I have, particularly on the other side of the table, to talk some about what are some of the lessons that maybe you guys have learned through experiences working with customers, partners, and around the idea of people who understand their buyer persona and how they approach it, how that integrates with their company strategy, and then what was that like during that experience? Our obviously the underlying assumption here is that someone who has a good understanding of their buyer persona and how that relates to their broader company, the company strategy, will be a better customer, right, and a better sourcer of products and services. But maybe it just gets lucky sometimes and it works out. So I thought what I'd do is just let you guys talk a little bit about some examples, maybe some good stories, and then maybe some not so good, maybe even horror stories about where there was a mismatch between the buyer and what they said they wanted and maybe what their company wanted, or what they said they wanted and what they actually wanted, like that kind of stuff, which is, this isn't about complaining as a seller. Yeah. It's more about, look, the whole idea here is to help people figure out to get the right things. And there's two parts to this. So how does that work? So Cameron, why don't I start with you and you talk a little bit about that, just, ruminate a bit.
Yeah. So, for those that don't know my background, I was in engineering and then I went into sales. And what I realized really quickly was that in sales, you're trying to engineer an outcome with people. And That's really difficult because people are weird. People are different and they do things unexpectedly.
You're weird.
You're weird.
So's your face.
Yeah.
You go me?
I mean, with systems and tools and whatever, you can pull a lever and you have an expected outcome. With people,
Right.
that's not it. And not all people are. This goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Are the same, right? So everybody has a unique personality,
And even the
characteristics,
same
traits.
person can be different in situations, right? Things are situational, for sure.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Funny you say that.
Absolutely.
Funny you say that.
Yeah, we've been dealing with one of those here recently. So, if you're listening, you know who you are. One of the challenges that I figured out early on was if you're in the role of a seller, you have to adapt your style to the style of that individual. There's a little bit of styling of the organization they're a part of also that you kind of have to factor in. I'll give you an example. If you're an expressive personality, somebody who takes a lot of pride in kind of the outward expression of emotions and whatever it is you're doing, if let's say for example you had a really loud colored tie on, and I told you that I thought that tie was silly, that'd piss you off. Like, you'd be like, what do you mean? Like, who are you, Mr. GQ? Like, that you can't tell me that. But if you're like an analytical person, you're going to interpret that as, well, what's wrong with this tie? There's help me figure out why this is the wrong tie for this situation, etc.
Right.
All I did was make a comment about your tie. It had nothing to do with anything else. But that one little thing can send you off and be completely misinterpreted and misconstrued in terms of the context of what we're trying to accomplish here. I mean, so you have the personality side of it that you have to deal with. Then there's the other side of things is really interpreting as a seller what it is you as the buyer are trying to achieve as an outcome. And a lot of times in this space, people have already predetermined, I need, 4 units of X, Y, or Z in order to accomplish what I'm trying to achieve. They don't even tell you what they're trying to achieve. It's I need A, B, or C, or X, Y, or Z, done. And I always kind of liken that to if you see a guy standing in, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, we'll keep it fair, standing and looking at a bunch of drills. He wants a drill. No, he doesn't. He wants a hole. It has nothing to do with the drill. The drill is just part of how you got to the hole.
Right.
So it might be best for us to figure out what kind of hole are you looking for. So it's always good to try to determine, challenge our customers to decide what is it you're trying to accomplish and gain a clear and articulated understanding of what that is, whether it's our decision to make or not. I mean, I'll give you another example real quick. If I go to somebody who's an analytical person and I tell them, oh, what you need is a hole, here's drill number 1, that's what you need. That's going to piss them off too. They would rather know there's 3 options. Here's the 3. I think maybe this is the best one, but you make your own decision with the data I'm going to provide you. Some people don't care. They just want you to say, this is the drill you need to get the job done. So you have to be careful in how you present all of those. I mean, it's very nuanced, right? But unless we understand what the outcome is they're trying to achieve, we can't bring any value to the situation. And
I think, to the point of the buyer side of it, right, they have some responsibility there too, I think, in knowing, I mean, you guys were giving an example before we got on the mic about a guy that has a very clear idea of what he wants and he just wants your help sourcing it, right? And while maybe that's not ideal from a vendor perspective, at least he has an idea of, he seems to be pretty clear on what it is that he wants, right? As opposed to, at least you know that up front, rather than him thinking, you go into it, him saying, what I really want you to do is help me kind of figure out a strategy, and I'm not really sure what the right solution is. And you do a bunch of work, and he says, oh, well, really all I really need you to do is just give me the 3 widgets, right?
The challenge with that is it takes a while of transacting with a client to determine whether or not that is indeed what they're asking for. Meaning, if you tell me you want 3 quantity of widget X, and you know already as the customer that's exactly what I need, and that's the end of it. If that was wrong, it's not my fault.
I was going to make that point.
But sometimes customers want to
bury
I want
you for
3 of X, but then they come back later and go, well, you should have told me.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, hold on a minute. Now, this is a very different value proposition in terms of what you're expecting.
You had that figured
from us.
out.
Yeah,
and maybe some of that is on the seller side too, because the better answer, if the example you guys were giving is a situation where there's some trust built up in that this is not an individual who would do that, right? Because if not, if there's not trust established such that that person does know what they want, you're probably better off to say, look, I'm not. If you want to just go buy 3 things, you should just go buy those. Not from me. Like, I want to make sure that's right, and if
That's
not,
right.
then you're better off over there. And I don't think everybody's willing to do that because they don't want to let they don't want to let the deal walk out the door.
I mean, you got to remember, buyers are liars, sellers are liars too, right? It works on both sides. So
Everybody's a liar, man.
Yeah, I think that experience has taught me that if you're better to take liberties that aren't technically yours, and you're better to expand your scope of concern far beyond what it ought to be. And if you're going to make assumptions, state them. If you're going to decide, here's why I'm thinking X, Y, or Z, well, go ahead and express that to that buyer. Make sure that they understand that. And it's also good to repeat things they've said right back to them and say,
Sure.
This is what I heard you say. Let's make sure. Are we thinking about everything here? And it's not to belittle them or to second guess them. And that's an artful delivery typically to say, I'm not trying to second guess you here. What I'm trying to do is make sure we understand holistically what is the intent here. What is your outcome you're trying to achieve? Have you considered X, Y, or Z? And again, you have to craft that message a little bit around the persona or the personality or character traits of that individual that you're dealing with. So, and to ask that of a young seller, oh my God.
It's tough.
It's very difficult. Yeah. So.
Yeah, for sure. And so, Bryan, I mean, you've been, again, he came up on the engineering side. You came up on the pure sales side, really, from telco. I mean, what's been your? I mean, give me a negative experience along these lines where you thought a buyer was looking for X, or kind of you thought their persona and their sort of what they were about was X, and it was really different, and sort of how that shook out.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't know if it just happened to you, but when he said that, it described to me like a bad experience. But I went through a Rolodex of about 300 different deals that I've done in my career where I thought, well, that was that. Like,
That was bad.
Which one do
That
you
was
pick?
bad.
Like,
That was
there's
bad.
so many.
So, I won't have any clever example. I was going to pick at Cameron a minute ago. He's always got some great examples. And I was going to say something about the drill and the hole.
You're already saying
in this space, it's not always necessarily about the hole.
Oh, yeah.
In this space, it's about the cool, flashy drill that's going to make the hole.
Yeah.
So
sometimes I don't think there's an intent to have a hole. It's just they want a cool new tool.
I just need something cool.
Yeah.
And
that happens.
we've seen many circumstances where we've walked in,
Tons.
and there's boxes, literally boxes in a data center, and it's like, what's that? And it was the old guy's, old guy, the ex guy's, toy drill,
pallet of cash.
Yeah, his drill.
Yeah. A lot of shelfware, a lot of just good intent that went out the door. But
so, for me, it would be I go to not understanding or thinking about a customer where there was a pretty heavy pre-sales effort that took place, and the buyer came across as someone that really wanted that, and we didn't do a good job of qualifying through the process what that was going to look like. It's here, although we've probably done it here too.
I'm sure.
And we gave a lot of what ended up being free expertise, because we felt like that it was more of a consultative type buyer, and that buyer let us believe that. And so I feel like took some degree of advantage to it. At least that's what I tell myself. Mm-hmm. And and this has happened more than once. I mean, I've seen them where they ended up not doing anything, and I've seen it where they went with the solution that we built essentially or architected and bought it from somebody else. And really, they were what I would consider to be kind of that cheap IT buyer, and they were going to get whatever they could get from whoever they could get it from, and they were going to go buy it as inexpensive as they possibly could. And that's a kick in the gut when something like that happens.
I try to think that I'm sure there are people who intentionally do that. I'm sure.
The one I'm referencing absolutely 100% intentionally did it.
I think that the frequency in which that happens shouldn't cause people to not put their best foot forward. I think the times that people are taken advantage of like that are few and far between.
I think that's the exception, not the rule.
I mean,
it happens,
for
but
sure.
it's not. I don't think it's that common.
Yeah.
And I also think there are times where stuff like that from afar looks like it happened, but it really didn't happen.
Did you say from a fire?
From a fire.
Oh.
From a fire.
From a fire.
Yeah. from within a fire.
From afar.
From afar.
That's afar.
Man, if you see it from afar,
It looks to me like it's on far.
it's totally different.
Jesus. Yeah, I can't even say it now. From a different vantage point,
There you go.
maybe one that's further away, not afar. I think sometimes people, it appears that they screwed you on something like that, but that wasn't really what happened. I imagine in your case it probably was, because if I could screw somebody over, I would screw you over.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. You've heard.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so much
it.
of that to me comes down to: is this a one-time deal? Is it a transaction, or is there a shadow of the future? Are we going to be involved over time, right? And so I think one of the nice things about service-oriented kinds of deals, right, is that they're usually going to be around for a while, right? As opposed to we've already made references to widgets and boxes and stuff, right? Buying some piece of equipment, right? Well, you might have service on that. You might need to be involved, or you might just be able to buy the box and move on. And if that's the case, like, that's a transaction. Like, I don't know about you guys, but if I need to buy one pair of socks for something, I don't really worry about, like, what's the long-term implications of that, right? You're oftentimes like, what do I want and how can I get it as cheap as I can?
Yeah.
Right? That's a very normal kind of way of thinking about it. And so I think a lot of times it kind of comes down to the nature of the deal itself, right? I mean, trust matters in every deal, but it doesn't matter so much in a one-off transaction unless the piece of equipment or the socks or whatever don't work. I mean, they disintegrate. That's what I think. I guess I would want to make sure that when we talk about these things, we try to talk more about the latter, those that do have some shadow of the future, because I think that's where the buyer persona and the understanding about some of the things we're talking about matters more. I mean, I guess what I'd say is in a one-off transaction, you're probably naive to think it's about anything else other than what do I need right now? How fast can I get it? And how cheap can I pay? How cheap can I buy it? Right?
And to me, I think...
And neither of you really have been in the business of selling those kinds of things very much anyway, right?
I think that part of the bit, like that transactional piece, I think all of that can be solved, honestly, with a good sales process. Because I look back,
up front.
I look back to that deal in particular. There was a lot of things that we could have done to control that from happening. We were in a situation where, the rep gets happy ears, thinks that they're the only person that came in and talked about the fish on the wall, and you go fishing, and we go fishing too, and all that kind of stuff.
Golf? Have you ever played?
It feels so good, And
I like bourbon. Do you like bourbon?
but you get down the road, and the deal becomes of a certain size, and the bottom line is there are parameters in place, and if you can take them, you can kind of put them in a box, and you can talk them through, like, the expectations of how they're going to ultimately make this purchase. You'd uncover, where they actually stood. I think the other danger area too that you can mostly control on the selling side is ensuring that the person that you're actually talking to and you're spending all this time with is the person that can say yes or the person that can say no.
Everybody can say no.
Yeah, true.
Not everybody.
The person that
can
can say yes.
Yeah.
Because if that person can't say yes, even if they are doing everything right to present the solution that you guys have built together, there's
still the risk.
Somebody can come in the other door,
sure,
with a relationship, and now all of a sudden,
well, I mean, this whole conversation is around buyer personas. At that point, it doesn't really matter what. I mean, unless they've got a lot of influence, right? They're not the buyer, right? I mean, that's at the end, and in an organization, any organization wants to be careful about who can buy for obvious reasons. You don't need everybody out buying stuff all the time, right? But the larger the organization becomes, in my mind, very often the trickier it gets to figure out who can actually buy something, right? And so that creates, I think, both, forget about the seller for a second, it creates some very strange internal dynamics, right? Because there's lots of frustration a lot of times inside a large organization for people who can't buy but are like, what the tools I have are not doing the job, but I can't buy what I need, right? And so they end up trying to find all kinds of ways to influence, manipulate. They're internally selling to the buyers, right, in some kind of way, and they may or may not be good at that. I mean, there can be all kinds of weird dynamics that you're not aware of because they're not going to tell you that stuff.
Right? Nobody wants to tell you they can't make a decision.
No, and they're not going to tell you like, my boss is they might tell you their boss is crazy or whatever, or he sees the world totally different than me, or she's got this other organization she really cares about, but they're terrible. And I mean, all those kinds of things that everybody's seen that are real.
When you try to, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and so one of the things I found that if you try to establish that true north or that intent, or what is the after supposed to look like after we do this transaction, after this deal's done, that you should be able to find consensus amongst all rank and file on what is the expected outcome. If you can't, then you just need to throw the rest of it in the trash, because you're never going to get there. Now, if they have a difference of opinion on how you're going to get it done, that might be acceptable. But then, you try to drive some, or seek some consensus amongst everybody on how. But the what should not be in question. If the what's in question, the whole thing's doomed from the start. So,
there's no way to be successful.
Correct, because there's no measure for success. I'm like, did you spend $1 million and did it do what you're supposed to do? I don't know what it was supposed to do, so I don't know. Well, then, okay, everybody's going to get frustrated.
Yeah.
The writing's on the wall usually early on, but also people like to withhold information. I don't think it serves anyone well in its entirety, but people withhold information like it's some kind of a game, and I think as I've gotten older, my tolerance for those kind of games has come and gone, but it is definitely prevalent, and I think it shouldn't have a place, but it does seem to have a place, especially in the larger organizations that we sell into.
Yeah. I think the good news for us, too, to tag on that point and maybe make a shameless plug, is we know what we're after. Like, we know the type of buyer that we're after, and we know that if it doesn't start early in the process with cards face up, it's not going to convert to that.
Correct.
Right? Unless you're just, there's sometimes there's the earning of trust, but when it's really for guarded, sure. You as well as I know, and you now too, it's not worth trying to unwind that. It's not worth trying to earn your way out of distrust.
If you're looking for one night stands, you're going to find somebody eventually. Yeah. But if you're trying to look at every person as if this is a potential marriage, you're looking for certain characteristics and traits of somebody you want to partner up with right out of the gate. And I know that's big talk for something as insignificant as what we do here, but there's a lot of money and there's a lot of, frankly, a lot of livelihood of businesses that we're involved in a position of, I wouldn't say we have authority, but there's a lot of trust placed on us that if we fail to deliver, it's going to trickle through and affect that business. So it does have to be vetted on the front end very early and quite often. Literally, we have to earn our clients every single day, every single transaction. So we always have to live up to who they thought we were in our best days and vice versa. And so that works. There is kind of an ebb and flow to how that takes place. But people get our best when we believe in what they're trying to do, and the more we know about what they're trying to do, the more we take it on as kind of our mission. So where there's a lack of clarity around what the goals and objectives are, there's a high degree of probability we're going to screw up. So it doesn't do anybody any favors to withhold all that information. But,
and to me it's interesting. You think about this idea of partners versus vendors, or sort of a zero-sum thinking versus win-win, right? Mm-hmm. And I think these are the things we're alluding to. But there are organizations out there that are incredibly successful that are not win-win oriented, right? And are not long-term oriented.
That's correct.
I don't want to do business with them, but
it's not
I'm also not going to sit here and say that the only way to do it is long-term partnerships that are win-win and are consultative and all that kind of stuff. That happens to be the business that we're in, so we think that's the way to roll, right?
Yeah, it's certainly not the only way.
But but I've been on both sides. I've been on the buyer side too, and when I think back, particularly when I was a CIO, we had kind of a mix. We had some partnership oriented relationships, and we had some sort of vendor transactional ones. So I think it's probably pretty common to have a little bit of both. I guess I'd ask you guys, when you think about, you guys are also buyers, right? You run a company, you buy products and services. How do you guys think about those relationships? I'll turn the tables on you a little.
Yeah, I would tell you the ones that we tend to, I'm sure their margins are better on us. I'm sure that we aren't quite as nitpicky about the financial aspects of the relationships, where we know that there's a vested... there's a shared concern about our stated outcomes. Like I know for a fact we have certain partners that we work with, they know our objectives. And the more they know them and the more they express to us on a recurring basis, hey, I know what you're after. I know what you're trying to do. And I see that they've pre-filtered, kind of what they're bringing to us, or they behave a certain way based on me not having to, I don't have to remind them of our priorities unless they change, of course. Those are the people that get our business. And, I don't think twice about, consistently going back to them and, I'm going to pay somebody to do work somewhere along the way. Whether I'm going to pay directly or indirectly, I would much rather, know that whatever I'm expending is going to good cause, which is our concern, right? Or whatever our objectives are. Certainly I take that into account. I think I'm quietly keeping score, but not in a conscious way, right? Just I know that I get good results when I deal with X, So I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's the same. The buyer's exercise, social predictability says you buy on a combination of three things: the product you're buying, some level of reliability of that product. Think about going and buying a TV or whatever it may be. The support you're going to get behind it. What's the maintenance agreement? What's the warranty? Who do I call and how easy is it?
The assurances.
And it's the price piece. And there are some people out there that state that they are 100% price buyers, but if you can really take them through a process to understand the nuances and the differences as it relates to support from one manufacturer over another and the reliability of a product to the service we provide from a managed service perspective, I would say, how many different ways can they open a ticket? What kind of transparency we give them as it relates to reporting, those types of things. I'm looking for the same thing in return. When we're making a buying decision for this organization, I want it to be, I want it vetted that way, and I want us to make the best decision we can. It's never unless it's just a purely transactional widget, I don't think we ever go through a process of, and maybe that's the seller in us too, we ever go through a process of that's a dime less expensive, unless it just doesn't freaking matter, right? Well, and everything matters to some degree.
Yeah, it does. I would agree with that. I think it's very difficult to expect that. I think you're set up to be disappointed if you expect everybody to behave that way. If you think everybody's going to care about what we care about, so that I think if you think about that on the front end, you set yourself up not to be disappointed. But if you know what you're looking for, in that, then you go out and you can figure out usually pretty quick whether people are cut from the same cloth, whether they're going to think what we think is important, and so on. And you filter out everybody else pretty quick. And I don't think it's hopeless, but it's hard to find people that fit in terms of selling. That's one of the challenges we've had in growing this organization is finding, if you will, sellers or reps and things that can value and appreciate kind of what we're spewing out here right now. And if they get it, 100% they've got a great chance. If they don't, I don't know that that's something that you can teach. I think you can bring it to the forefront of maybe their thinking, but I don't know that everybody innately possesses a care for that sort of thing. So
right.
Anyway.
And I guess recurring, since we're talking, buyer personas obviously don't have anything exclusively to do with buying technology, but that's mostly what we're talking about. So, with the transition to services, have you guys felt a difference in the way people think about buying? When I think about the idea of the old school purchasing department where that was built around mostly an industrial model, right? We're buying commodities, so we need
spec.
Right? What's the spec? We want it, and a nickel a unit does matter because we're going to buy a million sections of whatever,
100%.
And that's and that's what you did that because you were getting buying power and the sort of the Walmart thinking around that sort of an approach. It doesn't seem to make a ton of sense in a lot of what we're talking about. But my guess is that we still come across that. So I'm just curious, what are y'all's experiences with those kinds of things? We call it the bake off sometimes or whatever, but thinking about that sort of an approach.
I would argue that, if I may, I think one of the challenges that you come up with is in an I think the industrial analogy is a perfect one in that, if I'm sourcing bearings and raw materials and screws and that kind of crap to put together something, you're the screw supplier, you're the bearing supplier. You've made some of the specification and it does what it's supposed to do, or you're out. It's that simple. I don't think we sell a damn thing that does anything here by itself. So somebody has to put it together. But these customers aren't in the business of assembling this stuff into something that does something. So the onus is back on us to assemble it all, envision what it's supposed to do, and put it together. Sometimes they pay us to put it together and do all that. Sometimes they don't. It's just assumed that it's part of what we do is to make all this, massage it together to a finished product. And so I think having clear understanding of who's doing what to accomplish this stuff also puts the it kind of adds sort of an X factor to the value equation. And I was called to the carpet by a procurement group once upon a time in a large organization because it blew their minds that we would do work and not charge a line item hourly fee for that work, that integration or that assemblage of all of these things. It short-circuited them. We never got to a resolution. It was just, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. That was their answer. I'm like, well, I don't get it either, but that's the business we're in, so I don't know how to help you with that. But we kind of left it at an impasse. So is a product and should it cost what it costs? Yes, but the products don't do anything in this business. They by themselves. Most of them don't. So it does kind of change who's bringing. I mean, you got to remember, part of the business we're in is value-added resale, which I hate because a lot of times the value is stripped out. If I'm shuffling paper, it is a widget. It's a bearing. It's a screw. It is what it is. Okay. Very few things are that way. I mean, so it does require a lot of sort of intangible effort and things that are highly valuable to be pro bono gifted, and then that changes where it has to get paid for somewhere, so that's then squirreled away in the margin of the product, and then, so it's not the same widget. So it depends on the the vantage point of the buyer and what they think of this stuff. It's not all the same, so
yeah, I mean, I guess, Law, we think about that some in the context of selling Microsoft licensing, right? Which, at least from my perspective, is probably the closest thing to selling a standardized set of screws, right? I mean, a 365 Microsoft E3 license is the same. You and I get we get the same one.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Right. Now that doesn't mean you can't add value to it.
Right.
But it is, to your point that there are plenty of buyers who see it as just that. Well,
for sure.
It's just licensing, man, because lots of people sell it.
Yeah.
You need some licenses. Yeah, I got them right here. We'll be happy to provide them for you. Nothing wrong with that. But you can try to go beyond that too if you want, because if not, you're in the game of, well, then what kind of discount can you give me? And that's where you back to the point, right? Well, if I'm going to get the exact same thing, I might as well get it for the cheapest price.
Yeah. And they don't know value until they see value. Like we've seen some of those things too, where customers made an initial decision to go one way because they didn't see the value, or to not move because they didn't see the value, and then we somehow got them to agree to talk through it more, and they're like, you got that, you do this, you do these things, you can help us with this, back to the new commerce experience stuff. I think that was a big differentiator with what you and the Mercury Path team did to lead that. That's value add, right? I mean, because we stumbled across a lot of CSPs out there that they literally just tapped. Yep. They tapped and said, I don't even know what to do with this. We're going, or they didn't share the information with their customers that it was even happening.
Right.
I mean, we've come across a handful of those where they were like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, no idea exists.
Yeah, you missed.
Well, there's a custodial aspect of what we do, whether that's on the financial side or whether that's operational, where just because we sold something to you doesn't mean that we're done. Like in our minds, right? There's I can sell you a race car, doesn't mean you know how to drive the stupid thing, right? So we have to stick around and then make sure you're not overspending, over licensed, you're leveraging it for everything that's you set out for it to do. We find, as you guys well know, but I'll say it anyway, we're finding customers that they had a perfectly fine buying relationship with whoever was providing a license that does what it does. You're right, it's as close as you can get to commodity. But they also didn't bother to tell them, hey, you've got 100 of these things that aren't in use. You can cancel it. You don't need to keep paying for that. So, but nobody bothered to do it. So on our side, we try to again go a little bit above and beyond and take over that custodial aspect of managing and maintaining it properly and making sure that it's being used, and then staying on the customer's face to say, use these things responsibly. Don't spend that money if you don't have to. So we try to even add value where it's a commodity.
Yeah, and I think that's part of, again, back to, thinking about the person on the other side of the table, and they're thinking about, how do I do the best for my organization to get the technology that we need to be able to be successful, right? They're all asking themselves that question every day, whether it's explicit or not. And in this context, right, this is one where, we're in an interesting business in a lot of ways. I've tried to, when I explain sometimes to people what I do.
They say, why?
Well, they're just like,
that sounds made up.
Or no, they're like, that sounds really boring, and I'm like, well, it's fundamental technologies. Like these are, you got to have network connectivity, right?
Well, lights on.
You got to have, most places need Office licensing, right, to be able to operate. Do you use Excel? Oh yeah. Well, somebody has to buy that light. Like it has to happen. Like it's not it doesn't just appear.
Cameron sells race cars apparently.
Yeah, right.
Who knew?
I was like, whoa, when do we sell a race car?
Now listen, you can also.
What was the margin?
Like, I used to work for a guy he sat down with one of my customers once upon a time. This is an enterprise account. This is they represented hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and he said, "You buy Cisco." Yeah, we sell Cisco. Why are you not buying it from me? Yeah. I'm like, well, I guess it can be that simple too, can't it?
Why not me?
Like, please don't ever say that in front of my customer again. But sure, you're the CEO. Do it, like, whatever.
Why not me, man?
Yeah, so you buy Cisco.
Why not
Cisco.
me?
Why you not buying from me?
There you go. That's just a new strategy.
Why not me?
I used
there you
to.
go.
Yeah,
why not us? It's a
tagline.
tagline.
Fault the customer. Before I realized
he's talking to Talia. You guys cannot see
that
in case you think he's just like
or Emily.
Yeah.
Also, he doesn't have on pants. But
that's inevitable.
Either way.
Like,
it is after hours.
Pants are overrated
for
sure.
5? Take them off.
Since when did anybody start wearing pants?
Yeah, I used to think.
Have you heard of the modern workplace?
I used to think. Damn it! I'm trying to go somewhere here. I used to think it was the customer's fault when they couldn't see value, when they didn't appreciate what it was we had to tell them, and that pissed me off. But I started to realize.
It was your dumb ass.
No. Get ready. Here comes the punchline. If you're listening to this podcast, you're not part of this party, so you're okay. But there's a bunch of goons in this business. Like, no. I'm telling you that if you look at the company we keep and the people that sell into this space, it's no wonder the customers don't trust us.
Yeah,
it's no wonder that they're apprehensive to work with us, because I can promise you, I've seen a lot of them. Like, I wouldn't like us either. Like, it's the equivalent of, like, you pull into a used car lot on a Sunday because there's nobody around. But damn good well, if you pull in on a Friday, here comes the trench coat and the cigarette.
Man. And
like, they're pouncing on you. Hey, how can I help you today? Like, get away from
What's your payment need to be?
Like, yeah, exactly. Like, hey, here we go. And we're not far off from that in terms of
no, and
you get in this industry.
It's a birds of a feather mentality on the other side, right? We talk about trust like it's something that's easy, and the problem with trust is that you can build it up, and it only takes one or two bad experiences to be like, I'm not going to make that mistake again.
The first, the last, and the most recent. First, the worst, and the most recent. That's what it is. That's what
and that's the nature of, again, back to the challenge of, if you want to have long-term relationships, that you're giving yourselves a lot of opportunity to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
And if you don't, look, everyone knows if you make a mistake, if you own up to it and you fix it, that's oftentimes better than not making a mistake at all. Yeah. In many ways. There's been all kinds of research about that someone having a customer service issue and it getting solved in a way that feels good to them and feels like it was done correctly will actually make them like the place better than if they never had a problem at all, which in many ways is kind of like, well, that's totally insane, but that's also human nature. So,
well, that's why we have predictive braking.
That's what I was going to say. We break early.
We
break
early and often. Fail. Yeah, early and often, so we can correct things.
Hey,
we've had
Johnny,
some technology vendors who really bought into that.
Johnny, the calls get ready to come in. Watch this.
Kick him in the knee, but have the ice bag ready.
Go.
Yeah,
I'd be so surprised how fast
with that, we're finished. Have a nice day, guys.
Where were we? Oh yeah, we were talking about licensing.
Yeah, I think we covered it.
We covered that.
Yeah. That's exciting stuff.
No, I don't know what as I think about just trying to how we wrap this up and kind of bring it to a close. If you were gonna forget about whether you're trying to sell something, your kid starts their own business, right, and they're buying stuff. What kind of advice would you give them to be a good buyer, like to put themselves in a best position so that, because to your point, you have to buy stuff. There is nobody who just makes everything themselves. Maybe some guy lives out in the woods and is off the grid. But in general, you got to buy stuff.
He made things.
Ted, he did make things. Even he used the mailman.
He
trusted the U.S. Postal Service to get
proxy.
it. Yeah. So, but what advice would you give someone as a buyer? right? To try to be better at it.
I'll go first because yours will probably be a lot longer. And you'll cite several examples.
Here's the deal. Mine's
guess you're not
longer.
gonna
His
go
is
first.
louder. Yeah.
Longer, louder,
Yeah.
Bueller.
Yeah.
I would say surround yourself with smart people. Surround yourself with the types of things you're going to need to buy. Source people, that you know. Like I'm a referral based. I would consider myself more of a referral based buyer. I'm not going to do a lot of the legwork, especially when we start talking about like technology. That's where I gloss over anyway, which was so frustrating about this space at times. But I'm going to go to somebody that's made the decision more times than not that I already trust. So if you've done it, man, and I know that you're a diligent person, I'm going to probably roll with what you did. That's path least of resistance for me. And
I think that's a particular type of buyer.
It is.
I mean, it really is.
I think it's there's a couple of distinct ones: a referral type and then relationship, right? And depending on what you're buying, again, am I buying services or am I buying something that's really transactional? If I'm buying services, I want to feel really good about who I'm buying those services from, because to me that's partnership. That's when I've got to be able to rely on you to deliver something.
There's
me.
a shadow of the future. There's a long-term
Absolutely.
component to it for sure.
Yeah, and I think buyers need to understand. Kind of go back to that. I think buyers need to understand at what point they can be different, buyer types,
Right.
buyer personas.
I would say with yourself, alone, away from, the calm before the storm, get a pen and paper out, because it's easy to distort your own thoughts, and write down, what am I trying to accomplish here? What do I need in order? What stands between me and that accomplishment? And getting that done, is it buying something, whatever it is, and then what do I expect? What am I going to do, and what is out here that has to be done is going to be done by somebody else. And then remind yourself along the way: do they know? Do they understand
Validate they know.
that I'm expecting you to do X, Y, and Z? Right. And if they don't,
and they're
it's
good
kind of
with
on you. Yeah. Because I think that's where things typically get sideways, and people walk, unnecessarily a lot of times away from a deal or a transaction or some sense of accomplishment there, because it was all lost in the ether, right? It got somewhere between you and I. I'm depending on you. You don't know it, and you're depending on me to tell you something that I'm not telling you. And so, unless you can go back to that sort of true north, that what you wrote down as an objective, everybody's wrong.
Right.
And so, I would just try to, if I could teach buyers one thing, it'd be explicit, be clear, be blunt. I mean, we were talking about a customer this morning that, he doesn't know who he is, but I'm going to tell you, from the outside looking in, I think a lot of people think this guy's an asshole because he's very blunt. But you can be just as blunt back to him. Yeah. He wants to get something done, and he'll tell you, this is what I need done. And I've got two options. I can say yes or no. Right. And if I say yes, then he expects me to get it done. I love that. I think that's great. If they could all be that way, I'd take it all day long. But if I were a really expressive or an amiable personality, he would hurt my feelings, right? So it goes back to, everybody fits in a camp. You're an amiable and expressive and analytical or a driver, and certain engagement styles are going to set you off. You're not going to like it. But somewhere deep within all of that, that's all BS stuff. It is what it is, but deep down there's a yes or a no. Like there's a thing that needs to be done, right. And that's what we all have to ferret out. You just have different methodologies in how we do that. But if you're hiding it, look, hide the hot dog, nobody wins. Yeah. It's that simple.
He said hide the hot dog.
Hide the hot dog. We're going to end on hide the hot dog. I feel like that is the best way to end episode 20 of Cut the Shit.
Don't hide the hot dog. Yes.
Thanks again for listening, guys. Tune in again in a couple of weeks. We'll be back in action. Take care. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @cuttheshit_pod. We are also on TikTok @cuttheshitpod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.